The Warp, also known as the Realm of Chaos and the Sea of Souls, is a dimensional plane that exists in parallel to that of the material universe. This plane of existence, which is said to be fueled exclusively by the emotions and souls of sentient beings, is a churning morass of psychic energy where the laws of physics and even time itself cease to be. Within the depths of the warp, the various emotions and beliefs exhibited by mortals will, over time, begin to grow greater and greater in intensity, like rivulets of water flowing together to gradually form a raging torrent. Over the course of decades, centuries, or even through a singular act of importance, these emotions will not only begin to coalesce and take shape, but will eventually develop a rudimentary consciousness, allowing this aggregate emotional form to awaken as a true warp-spawned entity. The entities that are created in this manner will simply become known to most as gods and demons. The Chaos God Khorne, for instance, would be born from the wrath and fury of those races that fought during the event known as the War in Heaven, and would emerge as a god that epitomized violence, war, and bloodshed, while Slaanesh, by contrast, would be brought into existence through the hedonistic actions conducted by the ancient Eldari Empire, becoming the very embodiment of pleasure, self-gratification, excess, and suffering. Various other entities, however, would be created through the act of belief, in conjunction with raw emotion, as opposed to being birthed purely by the latter. Such entities not only include the gods of the Eldari pantheon, such as Isha, Asurian, and Cain, but also the nascent god of the Greater Good, a deity that was created by the more psychically sensitive races of the Tau Empire, who viewed the tenets of the Tau Va in a manner akin to that of a religious doctrine. Humanity would also bring about the existence of many demonic entities, albeit inadvertently due to the various atrocities that the race had committed throughout their history. A fairly noteworthy example in this regard would be that of the demon Draknien, who was created through humanity's first act of murder. Another example is shown with the creature known as the Ragged Knight, who was birthed by the massacre of Béziers during the 13th century. But while the actions of humanity have no doubt created numerous demons, is it possible that the race could have created a god or godlike being in their own image? While various religions have arisen over the course of humanity's existence, many would last for no more than a few millennia before becoming little more than a footnote in the annals of history. This would come to a head during the course of the Terran Unification Wars, where the Emperor of Mankind would commence the abolition of religion from mankind's domain. This would initially suggest that creating a fully fledged god or godlike entity may prove to be a fairly difficult act, especially when you take into account that both the Eldari and the Orcs had millions of years for their pantheon to take form within the depths of the warp. That being said, however, it is theoretically possible that some of Terra's ancient religions may have spread to other worlds where mankind first began to colonize the stars during the Dark Age of technology. One potential example of this comes from the novel Magnus the Red, Master of Prospero, with the world of Morningstar. During the course of the Great Crusade, Morningstar would experience a rapid geomagnetic reversal, creating a series of devastating magnetic storms that spread across the entire world. The Iron Warriors and Thousand Suns legions of the Legione Astartes would then begin evacuating the populace off-world, as the magnetic storms began to grow more frequent and greater in intensity, eventually wiping out over 75% of the world's population. But while the refugees were being shepherded to the world's spaceport, a religious cult known as the Sons of Shai-Tan would make its presence known. The Sons of Shai-Tan would then begin to utter sermons of doom and destruction before launching numerous terrorist attacks upon both the fleeing refugees and those Astartes that were attempting to evacuate them. This cult would grow to be so influential and widespread that its members would even succeed in infiltrating the world's Red Dragon planetary defense force. These compromised elements within the PDF would not only proceed to open fire upon the many ships that were evacuating refugees off-world, but would even attempt to assassinate both the planetary governor as well as the Primarch Magnus the Red with their tanks and artillery. It would later be revealed that the namesake of this cult was a warp entity bound within the wreckage of an ancient pre-Imperial colony ship that was located deep beneath the ancient city of Zarakin. After experiencing a psychic vision, Magnus the Red would dispatch a strike force led by a warrior named Atharva to Zarakin, in hopes of uncovering the mystery that lay within its ruins. When all contact with Atharva's forces became lost, a secondary force led by the Primarch himself would make their way to the city, discovering that Atharva's team had successfully located the vessel's remains. Seeing no sign of Atharva or his men, and speculating that they may have entered the ship, Magnus would lead his sons deep into the vessel's interior, only to find that Atharva's team had been possessed by Shai-Tan. Shai-Tan would use the body of Atharva as a conduit before stating the following to both Magnus and his sons.
My name is Legion, for we are many, but you shall know us as Shai-Tan.
Shai-Tan would then state to the Primarch that he was an aggregate entity formed from the tortured souls of Psykers, who had been subjected to many horrific, torturous and, ultimately fatal experiments undertaken for the purpose of sparing Morningstar from the horrors of Old Night. But was this single incident the sole factor leading towards Shai-Tan's birth, or could he in fact be the Abrahamic figure of Satan made manifest? The name Shai-Tan is certainly very similar to that of Satan after all, in addition to being almost identical to Shaitan, the name given to denote devils and other evil spirits within Islamic scripture. While it may initially seem somewhat unlikely, given that the names of the two entities are ultimately different from one another, it is important to note that over the millennia, many figures and organizations from the annals of human history have both the spelling and pronunciation of their names corrupted by the passage of time. For example, the 16th century playwright William Shakespeare would come to be known by the name Shakespeare by the 30th millennium, while the Catholic denomination of Christianity would be known by the term of Catholic, with the last surviving practitioner of this religion seemingly being the perpetual known as Alanius Pius, although some maintain that this may be, in actuality, a reference to Catharism as opposed to Catholicism. The world of Morningstar, where Shai-Tan itself would manifest, appears to be named after one of the titles that the biblical Satan was referred to by religious scholars, which was the Morning Star. Even the way in which Shai-Tan would identify itself to Magnus the Red is in itself a reference to the Bible, specifically Matthew 8:28-34, with the passage, "My name is Legion, for we are many." While the biblical Legion is a demonic entity that is entirely distinct and separate from the devil, it has been commonly, if somewhat incorrectly, associated with Satan on multiple occasions throughout history. There is also the fact that Shai-Tan had a number of cultists that were dedicated to his worship, with the aforementioned Sons of Shai-Tan cult, with its members worshipping Shai-Tan as a godlike figure. This act would also help Shai-Tan grow greater in both power and influence, for as a warp-spawned entity, it could and did indeed appear to grow more powerful thanks to the highly fervent emotions and beliefs of those who worshipped him. Shai-Tan would also refer to the ship it was bound to as also being Shai-Tan, which could be a potential reference to the concept of Hell, the very domain of Satan in Abrahamic mythology, which served as both his kingdom and prison. This notion does appear to be somewhat probable, given the many horrific visions that Magnus would experience during his duel against Shai-Tan, which depicted highly grotesque scenes of pain and suffering in a manner evocative of those traditionally used to describe Hell, as detailed with the following passage from the novel Magnus the Red, Master of Prospero.
Magnus's seer sight caught fleeting glimpses of endless rows of men, women, and children, strapped to the metal gurneys. He heard their screams rip through his skull. The sound was raw and animal, a sound no mortal throat should make, as the psychic potential of their minds was ripped out. Their suffering was beyond anything Magnus had thought possible. That people had chosen to do this to one another turned his stomach.
Shai-Tan was also noted to be incredibly strong, even by the standards of greater warp-spawned entities. Not only was Shai-Tan able to possess Atharva's team in order to attack the Thousand Suns, but Magnus the Red would find himself being repeatedly overwhelmed by the sheer power of the entity, which would begin subjecting the Primarch to the same methods of torture which had been performed upon Morningstar Psychers, so that he could experience the same pain, sorrow, fear, and rage that led to the awakening of Shai-Tan. Since Shai-Tan was capable of overpowering Magnus the Red, who was the single greatest Primarch in terms of sheer psychic capability, this would strongly suggest that Shai-Tan was in fact something greater than a mere demonic entity, for a being as psychically gifted as Magnus has been shown to banish lesser demons with ease. That being said, however, Shai-Tan could simply have been a demon of unusually high potency, similar to that of Draknien, an entity so powerful that not even the Emperor of Mankind, who is the single greatest psyker of the entire human species, is capable of destroying him. As such, it is certainly possible that Shai-Tan is utterly unrelated to the Abrahamic figure of Satan entirely, with its name simply having a convergent origin or perhaps even taken as a form of poetic irony given the circumstances surrounding its creation. Shai-Tan would eventually be imprisoned within the Book of Magnus, thanks to the combined efforts of Magnus the Red, Azek Ahriman, and Phocis Dakar, the three most powerful psychers within the Thousand Suns Legion, although such a task was no easy feat. However, during the burning of Prospero, the book which served as the entity's prison would be destroyed, and Shai-Tan would manifest itself once more. Despite this, Magnus would later come to bind the entity within another of his tomes, intent on utilizing Shai-Tan to shatter the Emperor's psychic defenses during the Siege of Terra. While the ultimate fate of Shai-Tan currently remains unknown, it is possible that he may have escaped from his prison for a second time. If so, then this could very well mean that, somewhere deep within the warp, Shai-Tan still lingers. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.